guests joining from the United States and around the world. My name is Chris Gray, and I currently serve as the chair of the board of directors of the Global Compact Network USA. The board, which is composed of sustainability leaders employed by the UN Global Compact signatory organizations, steers the Network USA towards a sustainable future by adopting sound, ethical, legal, governance, and financial management policies, and by making sure the network has adequate resources to advance our mission. I'm pleased to welcome you to our Leaders Summit session, Business, Peace, and Human Rights, Reducing Inequalities in a Complex World. We have the privilege of collaborating with Network Canada on this session, and I want to thank them for their partnership. The session represents a continuation of a series of important dialogues we began a year ago focused on business, human rights, and racial justice. Our goal today is first and foremost to ensure the spotlight on human rights and inequality remains at the forefront of our shared agenda. We also want to explore how environmental, social, and governance factors are requiring us to rethink the role and responsibility of the private sector when it comes to addressing human rights challenges. As we look to emerge from the pandemic, which revealed and amplified inequalities in the US and around the world, as we endure new and continued outbreaks of violence and warfare linked to hatred, racism, and authoritarianism, as we watch senseless atrocities involving vulnerable populations in our local communities and beyond. Our message today is simple. We must double down on the role of business to show leadership and to seek ways through partnerships to reduce inequalities, engender peace, and protect human rights. We will only achieve a sustainable future aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals and the principles for responsible investment by working together. I'm excited and humbled by the guests we have joining us today to explore these complex topics. First, we are extremely honored to have our keynote speaker, Ambassador Linda ThomasGreenfield, U.S. Ambassador to the UN. We will also hear from Rear Admiral Barry Black, Chaplain of the United States Senate, who will narrate a video addressing the ongoing and evolving human rights challenges facing society. We will hear from Network USA ex officio board member, Dr. Sanjeev Kagram, Director General and Dean of the Thunderbird School of Global Management at Arizona State University. He will address business and human rights amidst changing geopolitics in a fireside discussion with Network USA's Adam Gordon. That will be followed by an esteemed panel of experts discussing how US business leadership is responding to inequities. The panel will feature Ms. Paula David, Chief Communications Officer, Colgate Palmolive, Dr. Kevin Baggett, Chief Impact Officer, McKesson, and Ms. Sherry Meyerhofer, Ombudsman for Responsible Enterprise Canada. Network USA's Executive Director, Jacqueline Grace, will provide closing remarks. We were extremely excited to announce Jacqueline's appointment as Network USA's inaugural Executive Director just over 1 month ago. Jacqueline brings more than 2 decades of corporate and nonprofit leadership experience to the role, including work in the fields of environmental restoration, food justice, and female empowerment. Over to you, Jacqueline.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Chris. Honorable guests from the United States and throughout the world, I'm pleased to welcome you to the UN Global Compact Network USA Leaders Summit session on business, peace, and human rights, reducing inequalities in a complex world. My name is Jacqueline Rowley Grace, and it is my honor to speak to you as the UN Global Compact Network USA inaugural Executive Director. Network USA has grown significantly in the last few years, and we are well positioned to fully advance the 10 principles of the Global Compact and UN Sustainable Development Goals, both across our country and throughout the world. The United Nations represents our collective international commitment to global peace and prosperity. And after more than 2 years of increased global and domestic strife, that commitment to peace and prosperity is more important than ever. We cannot overcome challenges and create the world we want through government alone. The private sector plays a critical role, and business leadership is necessary to improve our world. The United Nations Global Compact represents a commitment to that business leadership. This leadership is not limited to programs and impacts in the foreign markets in which we do business or through our global supply chains. The work for a better world begins here. It begins in our own country, in our own offices, and quite literally in our own homes. American businesses are not waiting for others to solve the world's problems. Encouraged by the increased market value of environmental, social, and governance efforts, awakened by the competition for talent and the Great Resignation, and motivated to compete in a more complex world, American businesses are demonstrating leadership with regard to human rights because it's good for business as well as being good for the world. SDGs 10 and 16 directly outline our global ambition as it relates to our very American challenges. SDG 10 directs countries to reduce inequality. It underscores the need to achieve and sustain income growth for our poorest, to adopt policies that ensure equal opportunity and equalities of outcome. It marks the importance of empowering social and economic inclusion and improving financial markets to strengthen equality. SDG 16, peace, justice, and inclusive societies, directs us to significantly reduce all forms of violence and related deaths. It calls us to promote rule of law, equal justice for all, and effective, accountable, transparent institutions at all levels. At the UN Global Compact, we look to business to not only support these SDG ambitions, but also to show leadership in ways only business can, as represented in the Global Compact's SDG 16 business framework. We inspire businesses to embrace the role in transformational governance and to provide guidance to enhance business culture, ethics, and performance. Whether we are talking about gender equality, racial equality, or protection from violence, we are addressing human rights, and we are extending a conversation that the world has been having through the UN since its inception. We are upholding the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is foundational to the UN and the UN Global Compact. And we are also recognizing that universal human rights provide a foundation for justice. We cannot achieve the SDGs without business leadership, and we cannot achieve peace without business leadership. We cannot uphold human rights without business leadership. If you are truly committed to the SDGs and universal human rights, we call on you to commit to doing the hard and sometimes uncomfortable work that makes that commitment real. As we collectively unpack the S in ESG and determine what corporate leadership looks like with social responsibility, we clearly see an opportunity for innovation and new business opportunities while activating toward measurable impact in the area of human rights. We also see an opportunity to lead by example on our journey to impact the world. Every journey on this path to realize our collective goals starts with the first step, an idea, a policy, a pilot. Wherever you are on your journey, be it far along or contemplating how to take that first step, we stand with you in our shared commitment to create a better world. As the US private sector more meaningfully and more deeply invests in a future aligned with the SDGs, we encourage you to think more holistically about the unique role that your business can play at all levels in upholding human rights and creating a more peaceful world. To companies that have already made a CEO level commitment to the UN Global Compact, thank you for your commitment to a better world built upon the foundation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And to those who have not yet made that commitment to join our movement, I encourage you to do so. Please reach out to us for support. A commitment to the 10 principles of the Global Compact and the collective ambition of the SDGs to the role of business leadership is an important and valuable step in every company's corporate sustainability journey. In today's session, we are excited to provide a variety of perspectives from corporate and government speakers centered around peace, human rights, and the role of business. And now it is my great privilege and honor to introduce our next speaker, Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield.
Hi, my name is Linda Thomas-Greenfield, and I have the honor of serving as the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. It's my job to work with other member states to advance human rights and democracy, tackle climate change and public health threats, address humanitarian crises and food insecurity, and of course, prevent and end brutal conflicts like Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine. These are weighty challenges, and they're challenges we cannot solve alone. That's exactly why I'm so pleased to be speaking with all of you today, because I firmly believe that the business community has a central role to play in all of this work, and I know you do too. You're here today because you understand that ethical business practices matter just as much as profits, that companies have a responsibility to prioritize the economic, environmental, and social impacts of their operations. And you're here today because you're committed to eliminating child and forced labor, full stop. In that vein, I urge all of you to stand up to the horrors we're seeing in Xinjiang, where individuals of primarily ethnic Uyghur or Muslim backgrounds are being subject to forced labor through government programs. Economic pressure exerted from businesses helps deter these atrocities and supplements political pressure and activism. That's true in the context of conflict too. So I also urge you to follow the lead of so many US companies who have taken concrete action in response to Putin's brutal invasion of Ukraine. Nike, Starbucks, and McDonald's announced they would close stores in Russia. Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan Chase both said they would wind down business. And BP announced that it would sell its almost 20% stake in Rosneft, the Russian state-run oil company. You also now can't get Netflix or new Disney or Warner Brother releases in Russia. And packages will be stuck there because FedEx and DHL also suspended services to the country. The list goes on, and the impact of these efforts is unquestionable. And while you help us hold Moscow accountable, we also ask for your help in supporting the civilians who bear the burden of Moscow's war. The United Nations has determined that nearly 16 million people need assistance due to the crisis. I met with some of these individuals during my recent travels to the region. Most were women and children. They long for peace. They long for a day when they can rebuild, but right now they simply need food and other critical supplies. And the Global Compact has outlined in detail how businesses can help refugees and others affected by the crisis with financial assistance and in-kind donations. I leave you with this. I believe wholeheartedly in your ability to bolster human rights and make change. Over 15,000 corporate signatures in 160 countries are now part of the UN Global Compact. Your collective power is immense. Some of the United States' largest and most influential companies are engaged in this initiative. And I encourage any organizations that have not yet signed the compact to join now. Because we need you. The intractable problems we face cannot come from governments alone. We need NGOs and civil society. We need academics and scholars. And we most certainly need the business community. So let's continue working together to implement and uphold our shared values and advance sustainable development goals. Thank you.
Mr. President, I believe the present Declaration of Human Rights is a document of the first order of importance.
Over 70 years ago, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted by the UN General Assembly in recognition that the inherent dignity and equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world.
La delegación de México considera que la Declaración de los Derechos del Hombre.
This declaration is not merely a statement of Western thought, it is an expression of world opinion as to what, in our day and age, the rights of men should be.
That this is a good document, even a great document.
The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is foundational to our modern world, and yet we remain still, several decades on, far from the equitable world it envisioned. That gap has been further highlighted by the strain of COVID and our collective experiences these past 2 years. We have come to see together how expansive human rights really are. In the years since the onset of the pandemic, so many aspects of our lives have tremendously changed. There remains a tragic history of systemic discrimination in policy and practice with a disproportionate impact on people of color. We've seen people across the world take to the streets in protest, raising their voices for change. And while many took to the streets, the last few years have turned a lot of traditional societal norms on their head. Our relationship to work is changing. The changing position of the family has increased the gender equity conversation in the workplace. Women and caretakers are no longer okay being penalized for taking care of their families in the face of crisis. And while we navigate these issues here at home in the United States, the world is becoming more complex. Since the start of the pandemic, we've seen factory shutdowns, widespread lockdowns, and mobility restrictions, leading to stress on the global supply chain. The logistics nightmare is posing a continuous obstacle for the economic recovery from COVID-19. The ongoing global health crisis has further deepened pre-existing inequalities and demonstrated clearly that human rights must be continuously defended. Since the beginning of the pandemic, people in vulnerable situations, such as women and children, people with disabilities and people of color, refugees and migrant groups have been disproportionately impacted. As the fight for basic human rights continues to expand, we have watched the interconnectedness of it all, how one crisis can quickly escalate another, how peace is more precarious than we believed, how peace and human rights are deeply interconnected, and how business leadership plays an integral part in the foundations of our world. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations reports that around 193 million people experienced acute food insecurity in 2021. This represents an increase of nearly 40 million people compared with the already record number of 2020. With climate change and war pushing us further and further into a global food crisis, those numbers are bound to continue to rise. The events of the last few years highlight the long-standing inequities that are being faced around the world. Human rights is not an issue that can be put to the side. We've all seen these images, and we are familiar with their faces. Nevertheless, we have entered a moment of opportunity, and there has been leadership in places one might not previously expect.
As business leaders, world leaders, and global citizens, we must come together and address the underlying issues that prevent us from achieving inclusion and equitable growth, creating a better world based on peace and human rights requires us all to do our part. And let me recommend one way that each of us can do our part, particularly if you are a business leader. And that one way is to look upward in order to unite people. To look upward in order to unite people. 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 14 puts it this way: if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from wickedness, then will I hear from heaven, forgive their sins, and here it is, heal their land. The sovereign God of the universe can bring healing and unity to our land. If just his people, not everyone, just those called by his name will humble themselves and pray. Look upward to unite people because God is pleased with unity. Psalm 133, verse 1 says, how good and pleasant it is for brothers and sisters to dwell together in unity. Look upward to bring unity to our world, because when you look upward and pray, you are a part of God's family. 1 John 3:1, behold, what manner of love the Father hath bestowed upon us, that we should be called the children of God. That is why we pray, our Father. And then it goes on to say, verse 2 of 1 John 3, behold, now are we the children of God, and it does not yet appear what we shall be. But we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. And finally, look upward to unite people, because God has promised to answer that prayer, that if you will look upward, and if you will turn from evil, and if you will seek him fervently, then will he hear from heaven, forgive your sins, and unite and heal your land. Look upward to unite people, mobilizing them toward shared objectives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chaplain, for those powerful remarks. Hello, everyone. I'm Adam Roy Gordon with the U.S. network of UN Global Compact. It's an incredible honor and pleasure to be here today, and I'm very pleased to be joined by Dr. Sanjeev Kagram, Director General and Dean of the Thunderbird School of Global Management at Arizona State University, and I'm very pleased to say an ex officio board member of Network USA. Thank you, Sanjeev, for joining us today. We're here to talk about business and human rights amidst changing geopolitics. We've heard the ambassador speak earlier. The world is going through immense changes right now, and that's putting a lot of pressure on business. And we want to ensure that this is on the foundation of respecting human rights and working towards peace around the world. And so I'd like to ask you, what's the role of business in keeping peace and safeguarding human rights from your vantage point in higher ed?
Thank you so much, Adam, first of all, for having me join you. Of course, the UN Global Compact generally, the USA Network specifically. I hope that you and everyone that is listening in to this great event is healthy and safe as possible in these really complicated times we're living. You know, in my view, and I think, you know, the UN guiding principles on human rights, business and human rights, you know, stipulate this, that, you know, human rights and more broadly sustainable development, the sustainable development goals have to be at the heart of all that businesses do now. There's no longer a world in which, you know, this division between business, profit maximizing, job creating, that's what we do. The rest of the stuff is up to government and society to figure out. We know that every actor, and certainly business, given its tremendous impact on humans and societies and environments, have to put these issues front and center. Now, human rights and peace, for several different reasons. One is that if there is no peace, there is not an environment where business can be successful. So there's just a material, straightforward interest for business to put this right front and center. Number two, we know that ensuring and supporting and enhancing peace and human rights and the linkages between the two further legitimizes a business in society, the social license to operate, Number three, you know, businesses are citizens and composed of citizens who care about and have deep commitments to human rights and peace. So they're stakeholders, they're both internal stakeholders, they're external stakeholders, expect businesses to play leadership roles when it comes to advancing peace and human rights. Where does it start? It starts from really having a great, deep and broad sense of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, from civil and political liberties, all the way to social, economic, cultural rights, the different contexts of conflict and peace around the world. And if I could just end this opening comment, it really is, you know, sort of on the minimum end is to do no harm, is not to contribute to the further exacerbation of conflict, of violence, the undermining of human rights, right? So not do no harm, but what it really has to be is the other end of the spectrum, to be a champion leader, do everything a business can do when it's, you know, scarce resources. We understand they're not a, you know, a human rights NGO, but that advances human rights within their companies, in the communities they engage with, across the supply chains, and the value systems that they're part of.
Thank you for that, Sanjeev. And speaking of supply chains, with recent global issues like the pandemic, supply chain disruption, and many other changes to our world, how has that affected global peace?
Well, we know that, let's just take a step before the pandemic. Unfortunately, arguably since the global financial crisis, perhaps even prior to that, going back to 9/11, we've entered into an era of 20 years of increasing nationalisms, parochialisms, and, you know, division, building up walls and silos and so forth and so on. And we've retreated from an inclusive and sustainable, you know, sort of peaceful approach to globalism that, you know, it seemed like we were starting to make some progress on, we wanted to post-Cold War. And certainly there was this great optimism, right, Adam, as we all recall, and certainly I, as a doctoral student back in 1994, you know, the wall fell, the Cold War ended, and there was this belief that, you know, peace and human rights and markets and democracy, all of this was now going to come together, right? And it would be the end of history, as Fukuyama wrote, right? Well, 30 years later, we've come a long way, and it was already underway pre the pandemic. The pandemic only accelerated, deepened, created more, revealed, in some sense, even more of these underlying tensions. And we know that that's led to not only directly the pandemic, obviously unfortunate deaths, health issues, physical health issues, but mental health issues, the unwritten pandemic or unseen pandemic that's involved, and has contributed to increasing tensions, greater fears, anxieties, conflicts, and so forth. Supply chains have been disrupted, as you mentioned. All sorts of things have happened as a result of the pandemic. At the same time, I think it's also, going back to the first question, made it even more of an imperative and more clear to then businesses that they have to engage and they have to be leaders. They have to do it so in partnership with governments and international organizations and civil society. Not they can't do it by themselves, but it's not, these are issues, human rights and peace, and more broadly, sustainable development, and organized by the Sustainable Development Goals that businesses have to engage in. So the pandemic has been kind of I think, twofold. On the one hand, it's exacerbated a lot of these issues that are facing humanity, facing societies, facing the planet, climate change being obvious, one of them. On the other hand, it has made, I think, the call to action and the commitment all the greater. And so that's the sort of, the more positive or optimistic or half full way of think about the pandemic.
And so thank you for that, Dean. So echoing the ambassador's remarks earlier in this session, what lessons with regard to the Ukraine crisis can we learn with regard to human rights and peace and the role of business?
Well, in many ways, if you think about how we got here, I mentioned this history, right? Who would have thought in 1994 we would have, this is not what we were thinking of less than 30 years later, that we would have a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, outside of business, as we know, there's lots of multilateral politics, lots of superpower politics and diplomacy and other kinds of things, institutional arrangements. But when we think about the transformation of the Soviet Union that became Russia and the CIS, part of that was a transition to a market economy, and that market economy creating opportunities and benefits for ordinary Russians, for the Russian economy to grow, for society to develop, for institutions to be built, and business was central to that. I mean, for us at Thunderbird, we have had, and now no longer, the Center for Business Skills Development in Moscow in Russia. We've trained 550,000 business professionals. And that was because there was this belief that if there was more vibrant business, if business was engaging, creating healthy and sustainable economies, economic growth, economic development, that would lead to greater support and recognition and the achievement of human rights and sustainable peace. So I think the greatest lesson is we need to do more. We have to do more. Business needs to do more, and we have to do more on the front end. And then, unfortunately, when events like the invasion happens, business has to play an important role. Now, different businesses, as we've seen, have taken different approaches. Some have decided to disengage and show their commitment to human rights and peace by disengaging. And there are legitimate reasons and mechanisms in which that's the case. Others have decided to double down and triple down and say, we're going to engage even more. I think it's going to be a very interesting, for us to learn over the next, hopefully it's very short episode, this horrible war, which combination and types of approaches by business really helps in a context where we are, unfortunately, in war and not peace, where human rights are being undermined and exploited and violated in massive ways. What role can business do? But I want to go back to this continuum. Do no harm, absolutely do no harm. Do nothing that will contribute to the further violation of human rights. You have a duty to protect, a responsibility to advance human rights, and on the far end, everything that one can do to improve the conditions, enabling conditions for peace.
Thank you so much for that. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you one final question as the Dean of a foundational international management school of what you see as the role of universities and specifically leadership and business schools in keeping peace and protecting human rights around the world.
Well, it starts with the values that we, ask our students to embrace from the day they join us. And for us at Thunderbird, as you know, Adam, we have an oath of honor that our students pledge to when they come in, and then pledge to upon graduation. We just had our graduation, one of the special times at a university and higher education, all of our schools, sort of chronologies. And the three principles in that oath of honor, which are connected very much to the Global Compact and the UN, and so forth and so on, are: we oppose all forms of corruption and exploitation. We respect the rights and dignity of all people. We advance sustainable and equitable prosperity and peace worldwide. Those are the values we ask our students to pledge to upon coming in and upon leaving, and as alumni to reinforce as they go out in the world as business leaders. So it starts from the value set. The second then is in the courses and the programs. We have to ensure that this becomes a red thread to all of our courses, and we have specific area courses where students are learning how to not only they're not just embracing the values, but learn how to implement them to be actually effective decision makers, leaders, and managers. And so we have a huge and important role there. A third is continuing education, professional education, executive education. I mentioned our center in Moscow, and we have centers around the world, and we do this work, as do our colleagues in other business schools and management schools. As many of our programs, like our Young Social Innovators program that we do with USA Network, are about advancing these sets of values, these sets of principles, the SDGs, human rights. So we have and then finally, of course, we have to continue to do the applied research to support with tools, with capabilities, with systems, with innovations to further advance the role of business and their capability of business leaders in terms of human rights, peace, and sustainable development more broadly. So we have a huge obligation in every day for us to do this across the board. And what's exciting and I think again encouraging is that business schools and management school, leadership school, professional schools all around the world, individually, in associations, in partnerships, are doing this more and more and more. And I'm proud of that development.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dean. We're grateful for you joining us today, and we'll continue in just a moment with a panel on business leadership on addressing inequalities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam.
Hello, everyone. Again, I'd like to thank you for staying with us and joining us for this portion of the North American session on peace, human rights, and business. This is the final section of our session, and it's a panel on business leadership responding to inequities. We have some incredible speakers here today. We'll not be able to eradicate inequalities unless we are aware of the different ways in which they can manifest. And we have three speakers here today from vastly different organizations that will explore how they are using their unique organizations to overcome various forms of inequality, from race and gender to health and development. We hope this session will serve as an inspiration for the audience to think about more ambitious ways we can all contribute to a more peaceful and equitable world, and to the unique role that business plays in those efforts. I'd like to dig right in and allow our panelists to introduce ourselves. If we could go around, starting with Sherry, if you could please introduce yourself, your organization, and how your organization approaches its role in addressing inequities in society. Sherry?
Great, thank you very much, Adam. My name is Sherry Meyerhofer, and I'm the Canadian Ombudsperson for Responsible Enterprise. I lead the office of the Canadian Ombudsperson for Responsible Enterprise, or CORE for short. And the CORE is a state-based, non-judicial mechanism, the kind of mechanism referred to in the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights under Pillar 3, Access to Remedy. So specifically, the CORE is a human rights ombud with a mandate to monitor and influence responsible business conduct by Canadian garment, mining, and oil and gas companies operating outside of Canada. And in ombuds offices, they serve, generally speaking, an important role and function in Canada and around the world to resolve disputes and address power imbalances. So they provide a process to address inequities. And as an ombuds office, the Corps provides vulnerable people and communities with a voice, a platform to reshape how Canadian companies support and uphold respect for human rights, and finally, a mechanism to hold Canadian companies accountable when they do not uphold respect for human rights.
Thank you very much, Sherry. And Paula?
Hello, I am Paula Davis, and I lead communications and corporate social responsibility for the Colgate-Palmolive Company. It's great to be here. How we address inequities. So we do it internally and externally. We understand as the company with the brand, that most chosen brand in the world, and in more homes than any other brand in the world, we have a responsibility and an opportunity to make a difference in this space. And so a few of the ways we do that is inside of our organization by building a culture of inclusivity and belonging, and battling unconscious bias and things that can set up barriers to equity for people. So we'll talk about that a little later, I'm sure. And then in the area of oral health, recognizing that oral health is the pathway to public health, to improving your health around the world. And so we do a lot on oral health, and we'll tell you a little bit about our Bright Smiles, Bright Futures program, which has been around for more than 4 decades now. We're very proud of that. And our Know Your OQ education program to increase awareness, recognizing that there are disparities in oral health around the world, particularly in urbanized centers and in underserved communities. So we're very focused on those areas. And then a third way we do this is through creating pathways for people. So looking at diverse groups and helping them. There's gateways and pathways for people. Gateways helps them. And then through the Colgate Women's Games, we also provide scholarships through the largest track and field games in the United States for young women and girls, to help them provide pathways to better lives and scholarships to greater education. So excited to talk about that. Thanks for inviting me here, Adam.
Yeah, thanks so much, Paula. And Kelvin.
Hello, Adam. Thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. So I work for McKesson Corporation. I am the Executive Vice President and Chief Impact Officer. McKesson is about 184 years old at this point and is a Fortune 10. And with that, we recognize that we have a vital role in playing in terms of healthcare supply, chain, and distribution. We regard ourselves as a diversified healthcare services company. And as one of the largest employers, we are committed to not only promoting a more inclusive environment and a more equal environment internally, but also, given our size and scale and our reach, to also contribute to and influence all the environments where we work, live, play, and operate, and where we have partnerships and relationships. To that extent, we even last year revised our values. Our values were previously, the acronym was I CARE, and the first I was focused on integrity. We added and made it I too care and added inclusion. And so it's incredibly important to us that we live those values out inside our company, and that we promote them outside within the communities as well. So I look forward to sharing more around what that means and how we are actually taking deliberate actions to bring improvements in those areas to more and more people.
Perfect, and thank you all. We're really so privileged to have each of you with us on this panel. I'd like to continue with one additional question to all panelists. And Kelvin, I'd like to start with you as one of the world's largest companies, certainly one of the US's largest companies. How do you prioritize social impact areas at your organization to further a more equitable world aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals inside your organization, and then also outside of, rather?
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Well, obviously, we all know that there have been a lot of very public events over the last couple of years that have been tragic. One that I'll point to is obviously the murder of George Floyd. And that was an instance that actually preceded my being a part of McKesson. But what resonated with me was the way the company responded to that and the carry forward related to that. So like many companies immediately convened around that, had conversations internally, and then examined our own internal practices to promote more diversity, to address inequities, inequalities within our environment, as well as to influence it outside of that. So that is a very real matter. We made a donation and several donations that actually were promoting racial justice. That's one. Two, we also expanded our commitment to diversify our workforce, especially at the executive levels. And so we examined that, also examined the factors that contributed to that, recognizing that economic mobility is a very real matter. As one of the world's largest healthcare companies, we also examined, and I did get to contribute to this, exactly what is our purpose and why do we exist and what kind of contribution can we make? And so we created what we believe to be the first purpose statement for McKesson, which actually unites our entire organization, which our statement is advancing health outcomes for all. And with that, there was a lot of discussion and debate and very rich challenging around every aspect of that, including the for all, and what exactly was our role in a greater contribution beyond those. So those are some of the ways that we're doing it. When it comes to things that occur, we really look at it from a social justice and a social impact perspective to see, are these areas where we can be authentic, where we have credibility, where we can promote change by becoming involved. And then with that, we begin to assess what are the different degrees of engagement that we believe will help us to achieve a better outcome for those that are impacted or who might be influenced by it.
Powerful. Thank you so much, Kelvin. I'd like to ask the same question of you, Paula, how Colgate prioritizes social impact areas.
Yeah, and we do it internally and externally as well. And as Calvin was saying, it's interesting. We have a purpose statement that says we are reimagining a healthier future for all people, their pets, and our planet. And that all was something that was quite deliberate as we were developing that new purpose statement to represent our focus on equity and taking down the barriers to people who had some of those. So some of the ways we do this is the Bright Smiles, Bright Futures program. So we reach into communities through our vans and through educational ambassadors to teach kids about oral health, the importance of oral health, and providing them with access. We also know that minority kids want to go, and parents for that matter, want to go to the profession, to professionals and dentists and hygienists who look and speak their language. And so then when you look at schools and you see the number of people going to dental school, they're not aligned with the people who need these services. So we are also trying to fill that pipeline of practitioners, particularly in oral health. So we've got the education, we've got the access, and then we've got professionals that we're focused on to try to reduce the barriers and provide access for all people on oral health. And then on pathways, so if you think about providing scholarships and giving underrepresented groups the access and the resources to pursue brighter futures, as we say, building a future to smile about, the pathways is really important. So Colgate does quite a bit on the mentoring side, and mentoring and coaching is a really important part of the Colgate Women's Games program. So we really elevate the roles of coaches and parents and administrators in that. If you are looking to get to the Olympics, Colgate Women's Games is an important stop along that journey, but even more importantly than that, it's a pathway, it's a runway, if you will, to education, to educational opportunities. And so in addition to that, we oftentimes will bring in mentees from that program. From 1,000 Dreams Fund is another great pipeline and organization that we look to, and then community-based organizations like the Wadley School here in New York that we've gotten some great interns from. So mentoring and creating those pathways is another way that we do this.
Fantastic. And then the same question to you, Sherry, as well, though obviously a little different, being the government or a government entity. You mentioned that the office works in a few sectors: garment, mining, oil and gas. Could you speak a little bit to how the work you're doing is prioritized in terms of impact?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. And as you say, we're a little bit different. We're government. We're arm's length from government. So that allows us to act in an independent manner. And social impact in promoting a more equitable world is the raison d'être de CORE. I mean, that's we have been created to do as a function. Our mandate is focused on aligning the work of the private sector in the three sectors that you just mentioned, operating outside of Canada. So we're looking outside and making sure that companies in those three sectors that work outside of Canada are behaving responsibly, just like we expect them to behave in Canada. And I just want to give an example of, the alignment. And so all three of our sectors, as you can imagine, use chemicals or toxins in their operations. So a hypothetical situation would be where toxins escape and contaminate a local water source. So by working with Canadian companies to prevent such contamination, or by recommending remedial actions in the event of contamination, we promote and address the Sustainable Development Goals, including those related to, for example, good health and well-being or clean water. And you can imagine also that if the situation is one where the employees, let's say in the garment industry, are mainly women, or in the extractive industries where they're on remote lands are perhaps mainly Indigenous peoples or another minority group, CORE's work can positively impact and advance the SDGs related to gender equality, decent work, and reduced inequalities, among others. So that's just an example of how we focus our impact.
Yeah, Sherry, as a follow-up question, can you speak a little bit more about how you work with companies outside of Canada? You mentioned that your mission at CORE is to work outside of Canada or with Canadian companies outside of the country. But what does that look like in practice, and how do organizations outside of Canada engage with you?
Yeah, so it's Canadian companies outside of Canada. So and so we engage with them. Our mandate has 4 components. And that those components are promote, advise, review, and recommend. So what do we promote? We promote the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights and the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises. We advise Canadian companies in those 3 sectors on responsible business conduct, how to act responsibly, what the expectations of the Canadian government are of them when they're acting and operating outside of Canada. We review the conduct of Canadian companies and work to resolve disputes that arise from their operations. And we have a broad toolkit to do that. We can help negotiate between a Canadian company and individuals or local communities. We can do mediation and we can do an investigation. Our recommendation mandate allows us to make recommendations to the Canadian company themselves. And those recommendations are, how to address the actual harm that has arisen. And also how to prevent future harm of a similar kind. And we can also make recommendations to the Government of Canada with respect to policy and laws to support responsible business conduct, to prevent harm, and to promote human rights. The first of these 2 components, Adam, are promote and advise are proactive, and the second 2 are reactive. Those are review and recommend. And we deliver on our mandate in 3 ways. For example, panels like this to raise awareness of who the CORE is and what we do, and other, sort of events for different audiences, through studies and reviews that we initiate ourselves, and by responding to complaints.
Fantastic. I'd like to continue with another follow-up with you, Sherry. From my understanding, your office is the first of its kind for any government, and an excellent way of reducing inequalities by aligning the work of the private sector with the SDGs and Agenda 2030. What are some ways in which other countries might be able to learn from the work you're doing and to effectively take it on themselves?
Yeah, thanks, Adam, for pointing out that we're Canada's first business and human rights ombudsman institution, and also the first state-based business and human rights ombudsman globally. And because we're non-judicial, we are more accessible, and by that I mean it's simpler to contact us, to access our services. Our services are free, and ostensibly we're faster than by using a judicial or a court system. We're also more flexible. So as I mentioned before, we have these many tools that we can apply, using some or all of them as required to resolve a dispute. So when you go to a court, there's sort of there's a process from A to B, and it's very mandated. Ours, we can go from negotiation to review back to mediation. We have lots of flexibility. So that's an advantage. And any state can establish a similar non-judicial dispute resolution mechanism. Actually, the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights ask states to do that. And they can do it for some or all sectors, minus for 3 sectors, but it could be for all sectors, to provide advice and guidance to corporate actors and to hold them accountable when their actions aren't aligned with the responsible business conduct or the SDGs. And so in my opinion, a network of national ombuds institutions created to hold multinational corporations accountable would strengthen transnational governance, the protection of human rights, and the alignment of corporate conduct with SDGs across the globe.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Thank you. Moving on to Paula, you mentioned in your earlier remarks Colgate Women's Games. And it's really incredible to think that those are nearly 50 years old now. Could you speak to what the original goals of Colgate Women's Games were and how they've changed over time? Obviously, the state of women in sport, and frankly, women in society have changed as well. How have the games evolved with that?
Absolutely. And I would actually emphasize, because Sherry and Kelvin have touched on this as you have, that partnerships is key to any of our programs, right? I mean, Colgate can't do it alone. As big as we are in 200 countries, we can't do it alone. And as known as we are, we can't do it alone. So Colgate Women's Games is no exception to that. We work very closely with the schools to help increase awareness for the games so that girls know that these scholarships are available to them and that this program is available to them, to get them linked to communities now more than ever for mental health, for physical health. And we're seeing the toll it's taking on young people. The games is becoming that much more important. And we've actually got these competitions in other countries as well, but particularly for the Colgate Women's Games, that was started 47 years ago by Fred Thompson, an incredible mentor and leader and coach in his own right, who started the games, and it has grown since then. So we've got nearly 2,000 girls who participated in the games. That was just a few weeks ago. Cheryl Toussaint, who herself won a silver medal in the Olympics back in 1972, is an incredible leader now for the games. So it, in fact, did start as a track and field event and has evolved. We've always given financial aid to the girls, but that's become more of a component of the program as well. And we've evolved it to be focused more on mentorship, on the coaching aspect of it. So we want to make sure that we're creating these pathways for girls and communities for girls, recognizing that as great as social media can be, in some respects, it's the connectivity that the girls have to being on team sports, to being engaged with adults in real person. That is all very healthy for them. And so this has grown in importance and significance over the years, and we hope to expand it even further.
Yeah, no, it surely has. I mean, continuing with you, Paula, how does the Colgate Women's Games and the work that Colgate does on gender equity in that respect fit into the larger picture of Colgate's social impact strategy? As you mentioned, it also includes oral health initiatives like Bright Smiles, Bright Future. How does it all fit together?
Yeah, I mean, look who's buying our products, right? So that right there is important, that we have representation within our company and we have representation in our marketing and social impact programs that speaks to people who buy our products and use our product. So that is extremely important from a business perspective. And whereas I think, many years ago, it may have seemed almost crass to link philanthropy or community outreach to your business objectives, today people understand the shared value model. And the beauty of this is now it's actually swung to the other side of the pendulum, where you've got your shareholders saying, I want to know what you're doing, where you've got consumers saying, I don't want to just see it in your marketing, but I want to make sure that your company is reflecting my values and doing the things that are important to me. So it's not just about how you're positioning your brand, but it's also what your company is doing. And so linking those two things is really important. And the SDGs help provide that standardized approach, so people can say, okay, I see how these companies are working, and there's a certain level of standardization as people think about how meaningful the impacts are that companies are using. So for gender specifically, we reached pay parity in the US a number of years ago ahead of many other companies, and we're proud of that. Our representation is great. For Colgate Women's Games, it's another piece of our strategy, our community outreach, in addition to what we're doing internally, that speaks to who we are as a company and what our values are. So the people who are buying from us want to buy from us and feel good about it. And I think, Kelvin, you touched upon that as well.
Oh, perfect. And moving on to Kelvin, moving from gender to other lenses of inequality, McKesson is the country's largest healthcare company, and healthcare inequality is prevalent in the United States. For example, the rate of uninsured African Americans is far higher than that of white Americans. So how does McKesson work to help address these disparities in the US and frankly beyond?
Well, thank you, Adam. It's the pandemic, which obviously we're still in the midst of a pandemic, but at the height of it, it certainly illuminated these broad disparities that exist. And it also shed light on the fact that these disparities don't just exist because of biological or genetic reasons, right? There are so many other factors. And what I'm incredibly proud of is the role that our 76,000 team members who are part of Team McKesson across the US, Canada, and in Europe play every day in making sure that we're actually getting vital medical, surgical supplies and therapies to those who are in need. Also, the technologies and the services that we have in place to also promote access and affordability so that individuals who are receiving these interventions and therapies, specifically medications, can understand their benefits better, can understand their options better as well. But beyond that, to tie back to the pandemic, what we recognized was not only was it not just genetic or biologic, that there were also these other environmental factors, these social drivers or social determinants of health. And what I'm incredibly proud of is I'm also in a newly created role, which is around this shared purpose, this impact officer role, which I take humbly and with great honor, but also with tremendous obligation. And with that, we actually look at three areas. So first is our people. So what are we doing in service to those members of our team each and every day, and how do we improve their lives? And I want to come back to that. The second is what are we doing within our community? So I talked about where we live, work, and operate, as well as the relationships and partnerships that can expand to the for all, which is what we aspire to do. And the third is the planet. So people, community, and planet. That's how we organize as a global impact organization, which I have the privilege to oversee. As part of the McKesson enterprise, we have begun to dig deeper into those social drivers, and specifically looking initially at what are the factors that influence the health and well-being of our people, our team members, and then have begun to expand that out into communities where we have a large geographic footprint. We recognize that we have a role and a contribution that we can make that extends beyond just our core business, and we can do it in a way that, again, is authentic, that is credible, that promotes sustainable and enduring change that we can all be proud of.
Fantastic. So in the interest of time, I'm going to move to one closing question for all panelists. And if you could keep it as brief as possible, I know that's going to be difficult given the question. But as a closing question for all panelists, what can other organizations, other businesses, other countries, in the case of Canada, learn from your work in addressing inequality, whether that's developing a program like Colgate Women's Games, addressing healthcare inequalities, or in the case of Canada and CORE, what can business and other government learn from your work? And Kelvin, I'll give you the floor to begin that answer.
Given the time limitations, I will be very succinct on this, and that is, what I like to say is to think globally and broadly, but to act locally and do things that are going to be enduring and sustainable. And so we need people who are committed to change for the long term, because these problems that exist and these disparities and inequalities that exist are not insurmountable, they're not intractable, but they do require fortitude that is necessary for us to produce a better future for all people.
Perfect. Paula.
And I would point to two things. One is partnership. So we work with the National Dental Association, the ADA, with nurses, with pediatricians, with the schools, with the administrators, with coaches, So if we can all work together, McKesson, let's work together. You know, if we can all work together on these aspects of health and improving our communities and the health of our communities, working with governments, that will get us there. And then the other side is measuring what we do. And so the standardization of those metrics is really helpful. Thank you, Adam, for those. And for governments like Canada, Sherry, they're helping us to help other people evaluate the effectiveness of our program so they can see that they are truly meaningful and making impacts.
Perfect. And Sherry, the last word.
Great, thanks. So the mechanism CORE uses to address inequities are related to the accessibility of its services. And by that, I mean anyone anywhere in the world can contact the CORE through our website, by email or phone. We have the capacity to engage in local languages through interpretation and translation, and we're set up to engage local dispute resolution experts to address cultural and other sensitivities. So companies can look to CORE's processes and services to inform their own corporate grievance mechanisms, and countries can look to what the government of Canada has done in creating the CORE, and learn from how we're setting ourselves up, and hopefully we'll have some lessons learned, because we are the first of the kind in the world. We're just in the stages of doing this, and so I'm sure we'll do some things great and some things we'll need some work on, and hopefully I can learn from both what we do well and what we will strive to do even better and as we go forward.
Well, perfect. I'd like to thank each of the panelists, our illustrious panelists, for joining us today from the UN virtual stage, and invite the audience to join us for the rest of the session. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for that inspiring discussion, Adam. And thank you, Paula, Kelvin, Sherry, for taking time to share your perspectives here at the Leader Summit. And of course, thanks to all of you in our audience for joining the Network USA session in partnership with our colleagues from Canada on business, peace, and human rights. To recap a few takeaways from our session today. First, we need human rights and sustainable development to be at the heart of business leadership. There is no longer a division between societal progress and business. This is especially true with regard to peace and human rights. If we do not have peace, then we do not have an environment in which business can succeed. Second, we need people and companies committed to change in the long term. The problems of inequality are not insurmountable, but they do require fortitude. And lastly, as the ambassador noted in her remarks, businesses have the ability to bolster human rights and lead change. Companies committed to the UN Global Compact are part of an immense collective power. If your company has not yet made a commitment to the UN Global Compact, please do so and join this critical global movement of business leadership. Thank you again for joining us today. We look forward to watching more of this Marathon Leader Summit with all of you around the world.